Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk People Pleasing. And today's episode is something close to home for me, and I'm sure for many of you too. And that is the habit of over apologizing. So, just the other day, I had one of those moments that reminded me of how this habit can still show up for me, despite all the stuff I've worked through and all the things that I've done and how far I've come. So, I went for food and I had to let the waiter know that my food wasn't right, but even though I knew it was perfectly reasonable to say, I found myself saying automatically, "Oh, sorry." It's like I'm apologizing for his error. And it took me back to when I first became more aware of my people pleasing tendencies and how apologizing used to be like one of my biggest people pleasing habits. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I do that too, I'm always saying sorry, you're definitely not alone. Over apologizing can feel, like I say, almost automatic. It's understandable that many of us lean into this habit of saying sorry, and it often runs so deep that we barely even notice it. Like it's just so habitual. And if you think about it, no wonder, because we've spent years doing it, probably years practicing saying sorry. It's like it becomes muscle memory. And today I want to talk about why that habit happens and ways to start noticing it, which I know can feel really frustrating when you start noticing it more in yourself, but it is worth it. And I want to also give you some practical ways to replace sorry with something more helpful as well. So let's start with the why. Like, one of the reasons over apologizing feels so automatic is because it's often a learned procedural response. So it's something we do without thinking because we've practiced it so many times before, a bit like riding a bike. And for a lot of people pleasers, apologizing quickly or for minor things becomes this go-to way of trying to control how others see us. It's as if by saying sorry right away, we can make ourselves seem more likable or easygoing, or it'll help us avoid being judged or criticized. So it can be like an unintentional but a go-to way to respond to things. So think how it shows up for you, like in everyday life. A really common one is when you say sorry when someone else has bumped into you. So maybe they've, like, you're in the supermarket with your trolleys and you're just stood there and someone goes into you, and you apologize to them as though you somehow managed to be in the wrong just by standing where you were standing. Or maybe you've done that awkward sorry jog where someone holds the door open ahead of you and suddenly you're speeding into a power walk or run. Well, I'm sorry, apologizing all the way. And we're apologizing for them deciding to hold the door open for us. But many of us started over apologizing because perhaps growing up, you might have received the message, whether directly or indirectly, that your needs or feelings were too much or an inconvenience. And apologizing quickly became a way for you to seem less of a burden and more accommodating. And this conditioning is so common, and it's worth giving yourself a bit of compassion. There's that word again, most episodes include it, for how deeply it can affect you, though, because each time you're apologizing unnecessarily, you're sending yourself a subtle message that your needs are secondary somehow, or that you're in the wrong when you're not. So, noticing this habit and bringing it more into your awareness when you're doing it is the first big step to changing it and breaking it. Breaking the habit itself can be really frustrating. Like, you might catch yourself saying sorry in situations where you're genuinely trying to do better, like I did at the restaurant. But it's okay. Like, these little moments of noticing are progress in themselves because you're actually observing yourself and being curious about it, which is a massive step in personal growth. So even if you don't feel like it in those moments when you notice it, just remember you are progressing each time. So why does this show up so strongly in people pleasers? So you may have found growing up, perhaps, that apologizing became a way for you to feel safer in your environment or to avoid, potential conflict. If you've grown up feeling perhaps responsible for others' emotions or comfort, saying sorry can feel like a quick fix to smooth things over, whether or not there's actually a problem or if you're actually at fault or not. It's almost like you then are trained to put other people's needs and comforts first without even realizing it. There's also the influence of the form response, which is a threat response where we instinctively try to appease people to feel safer. So even when there's no real threat, our brains have learned to offer an apology, if you like, as a way to avoid discomfort or avoid any potential negative reaction. And that response, as I say, it becomes deeply procedural, automatic. So it can take time and practice to disrupt it. Becoming curious about when you tend to say sorry can make a big difference. So try and notice the patterns in your apologies. Is it in specific situations? Is it with certain people? Or is it around particular issues? Building that awareness around those patterns can be powerful because it'll put you in a better place to make a conscious choice about when and how you respond when you would normally be saying sorry. So that's a bit about increasing your awareness, I suppose, about it. But if we were to get into like practical steps to help you reclaim your voice and start saying sorry less often, one of the best ways to start is by creating a little pause before you apologize, just to try and stop that automatic reaction or delay it. So if you catch yourself about to say sorry, try and pause and try and ask yourself, like, is an apology necessary here? And if it's not, you can then build up to replacing it with a gratitude or a neutral phrase. So for instance, instead of saying, "Oh, sorry for bothering you, sorry for bothering you," you could say, "Oh, thanks for your time," or "I really appreciate you taking the time," or "I appreciate you listening." And then that rephrasing acknowledges the other person and what they're doing without you putting yourself down when you don't need to. And then, as I said before, get curious about stuff. So it can be helpful to track your apologies for a few days. And as I say, it will be annoying to you because it'll be like, oh my God, I keep saying sorry. But write down each time you notice yourself saying sorry unnecessarily and consider the context within which you're apologizing. Are you more likely to apologize in work? Is it with certain friends? Is it with certain family? Is it when you're feeling anxious? Is it when you're worried that you've upset someone or you're having to turn someone down? Just keep noticing and keep noting these patterns down. And despite the annoyance of noticing, developing that awareness can help you then see perhaps patterns that you hadn't previously noticed when it was so automatic that it was outside your conscious awareness. And the more you know, the better placed you are to do something about it and to respond differently. Another thing you can start doing when it feels like the right time for you is practice being assertive. It can feel a bit strange initially, especially if you're used to softening your language or things that you want to say with sorry, as a lot of us do. I still catch myself sometimes now. So perhaps you've taken a bit of time to get back to someone, or I'm trying to think of an example. You could say, like, instead of saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry I didn't get back to you sooner. I'm really sorry." You could say something like, "Oh, thanks for waiting. I had a few things to finish. Full stop." Or if someone bumps into you, instead of apologizing, you could just say, "Oh, no worries." And that's it. These small shifts away from sorry might feel a bit uncomfortable. It might be really hard actually to do it initially just because of the habit and how ingrained it is. But over time, the use of a different phrase and a bit of a more assertive one will reinforce a more confident sense of self within you. And sometimes it helps to replace sorry with a phrase that better fits the situation. For instance, if you're running late to a meeting or something, instead of saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry I'm late," da, 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 and then giving all your excuses why you're late, or reasons, I should say, you might say, "Oh, thank you for your patience." Or when expressing a concern about something, instead of saying, "I'm really sorry to bring this up," you could say, "I'd like to address something that's important." You can see how the shift in language demonstrates a shift in terms of confidence that comes across with it as well. Because sorry sort of downplays your needs. When expressing a concern, instead of saying, "I'm really sorry to bring this up, I'm sorry to have to do this," an assertive, more assertive, sort of thoughtful response would be, "I'd like to address something important," or something like that. This language change, it doesn't downplay your needs or your discomfort, and it still respects the other person. You're not being rude or impolite. You're just sort of stating something more factual without, yeah, without downplaying your needs. So then consider what changes when you stop over apologizing. It's not just about not saying those words, it's about building, as I say, that confidence and that trust in yourself as well, for others to see that respect you have for yourself and your boundaries. When you stop apologizing unnecessarily, you're telling yourself and you're letting the other person know I matter. Your comfort and needs are just as valid as anyone else's. And importantly, that you are not in the wrong and you're not defective in some way. So it's not only empowering for you, but it also builds more balanced relationships with other people where you're seen as someone who values both kindness and boundaries. And it also fosters more authentic connections as well, you know. By being less apologetic, you invite people to see and respect the real you, not just the version of you that's focused on making everyone else feel comfortable and putting yourself down. And I know, honestly, I know it's all easier said than done. As I've said, I still notice the sorry habit. Like, I just notice it like, oh, I've done it again. But it's nowhere near as often. And the thing is, it's growth every time because when I do notice, noticing, observing, being curious, it's all growth, it's all progress. And I'm able to make a note to watch out for it or pause and replace it with a different response. And it's worth reminding you as well that progress can be gradual. Some days you'll be like super aware of it and on it. And other days you might fall back on old patterns, as we all do at times. And that's okay. It's part of being human. And each time you choose not to say sorry unnecessarily, you're creating new neural pathways in your brain to respond differently and pathways that reinforce your sense of self worth. And obviously, it might be tricky at first, but as you keep noticing and gently adjusting, you'll find yourself growing more confident and more sure of yourself. Not in a horrible way, just in a way that you would want others to be about themselves as well, you know? So if you give it a try and if you do anything this week, just take that away from this episode of just practicing noticing how often you say sorry. You may or may not be surprised by what you find. And then each time you notice that apology pop up in you, just ask yourself, did I really need to say sorry there? Would I be expecting an apology from another person if they were in my shoes right now? And you might surprise yourself with how often you don't need to be saying sorry. I hope you found this helpful. And if you did, please like and share with other people pleasers in your life. And feel free to DM me as always, any content ideas, usually best on Instagram at Charlotte_Bailey_therapies. And it's worth saying as well, you can also download a free guide from my website, which is charlottebaileytherapies.com. And the guide talks you through different ideas, really, of other unhelpful people pleasing habits you can try and spot and try and change as you go about your daily life. So you might find that helpful. But anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you soon.